My sister-in-law requested a house key. I refused. Then it vanished. When I went to her apartment to get it, I encountered something shocking. I recently married my boyfriend of 6 years. We are both 27. While COVID has set our careers back a little, we are figuring it out together. My husband is not particularly close to his family. He never said why he isn't close to them, but based on what I've gathered, my husband and sister-in-law have some issues. These concerns compelled the in-laws to choose sides. My spouse hasn't been close to them since they sided with my sister-in-law. To be honest, it didn't disturb me too much. However, because I come from a large family, my spouse was frequently invited to our family gatherings since we had been together so long. Following these incidents, I noticed my spouse becoming silent, melancholic, and dejected. When we tried to talk about it, he never truly opened up. He just told me he wished he had a better family. I recognized that he desired a closer or better relationship with his family, but I didn't want to do anything without his approval. When I volunteered to contact his family on his behalf, he kept saying that there would be a better moment, but I had no idea when that would be. At one time I was certain it would happen at our wedding. However, we married in a small ceremony attended by only our closest friends and family. He had not invited anyone from his side, though I did meet his parents and my sister-in-law. While our wedding ceremony was going on, his parents and sister attempted to enter the site, despite my husband having clearly cautioned them against it. When they were successful in entering the premises, my husband firmly instructed them to leave, indicating they were not welcome. My sister-in-law stood in the corner, watching everything happen. When her eyes met mine, she offered me a little shrug, as if to say, "What else are we supposed to do?" Once they were booted out, the wedding went off without a hitch. Following that, we were content to be married despite the odds. When we were on our way to our honeymoon, I received a friend request notification on my phone. It came from my sister-in-law. It seemed odd, but I didn't mind because we were family. I added her, then forgot about it. When we returned from our honeymoon, my husband and I were joyfully settling into our new home and married life. That's when my sister-in-law returned to my life. She messaged me stating she knew I came from a large family and understood the value of family, which she claimed my husband did not. She expressed her gratitude for my assistance in reuniting the family. She also discussed in detail how my husband could be a bit juvenile, but promised me that if we worked together we would be able to fix everything quickly. I was naive and believed her. We began talking more or less regularly. She even came over to our house once or twice while my husband was away because she wanted to meet me. Since I worked from home and had health difficulties, I couldn't entirely avoid her. During one of these visits, my sister-in-law requested a copy of the keys to our house. This was an odd request. When I questioned why she wanted them, she stated that she was concerned about me because I was at home all day working. She said that if something happened to me while my husband was gone, having a key would allow her to enter and assist me. Although I understood her argument in the context of a medical emergency, something about her request seemed odd. Her statements made me feel uneasy, but I couldn't understand why. I gently declined and promised her that if anything happened, I'd call my husband. However, my sister-in-law did not appear pleased with my refusal. She quickly ended the conversation and departed. Although she was smiling, it didn't reach her eyes, which worried me even more. Following the incident, I stopped inviting her over. Every time she wanted to visit, I would make excuses to keep her away from the house. But one day my justifications were ineffective, and she came over anyhow. I was on high alert the entire time she was present. When she eventually departed, after lingering for tea, I felt relieved, but not for long. A few days later, I couldn't find my house keys in the customary location. Panic ensued instantly. I decided to go to my sister-in-law's apartment to get them. In one of our early talks, she provided her address and invited me to tea. I couldn't go since I was ill, but I knew the spot. As soon as my husband arrived home, I jumped into my car and drove to her place. I knocked on the door, and a man answered. I inquired if I might talk with my sister-in-law. The man respectfully informed me that nobody by her name lived there. I stated that she had given me this address, and even showed him her picture. He glanced at it and stated that my sister-in-law did not live there, and that I must have entered the wrong address. This seemed really suspicious. I casually messaged her and asked for her address again. She replied with the same address as before. By this point, I was absolutely panicked. I arrived home trying to act normal, but I could tell I was nervous. My husband realized right away that something was wrong. He has been trying to ask me what is wrong and what has happened for the past 2 days, but I have no idea how to explain the issue to him. I don't want him to be disappointed in me, but I realize I should inform him. I kept wondering if it was my fault for initiating the entire conversation with my sister-in-law. If I hadn't done it, I wouldn't have lost the keys in this manner. But I really wanted to help. I know I should inform my husband about the entire scenario. I read what you stated, and I agree that I was terribly stupid to keep things from him. I should have told him about it. Anyhow, I understand why some of you are dubbing me the evil person in this circumstance, and I also understand those who believe I am not fully to blame. Whatever happens, I'll do the right thing tonight and tell him everything. Do not fear, I will keep you updated. Regardless, I appreciate you being sincere and pointing out my mistakes. So the conversation went better than anticipated. When my husband arrived home from work, I told him I had something to discuss with him. He appeared relieved. When we were both comfortable, I told him everything. I described how his sister-in-law messaged me after our honeymoon, telling me that I could mend the family by remaining in touch with her and gradually reintroducing her and his parents into his life. I told him I didn't mean to hide anything or go against him, but I was afraid he'd stop me from doing anything since he was always refusing to tell me what was wrong with his family. I decided to try to heal the relationship myself. He listened to what I said without interrupting. When I was finished, my husband expressed his disappointment in me for keeping this from him for so long. He claimed I should have asked him what the problem was, and he would have told me everything. Now that we are married, he added, he didn't feel comfortable informing me before we got married since he didn't know when his family would try to turn my heart against him. When I told him I couldn't follow, he gave me all the facts. My father-in-law is a very egotistical and abusive man. He has always been like this, caring just about himself. My sister-in-law acquired this feature from him. She is a narcissistic yet charming lady who appears to be a very empathetic and sincere human being, but in truth, my husband became aware of the hazardous atmosphere as soon as he matured enough to notice it. My mother-in-law and father-in-law both refused to divorce one another because they didn't want to go through the inconvenience of court proceedings. When my sister-in-law's behavior got her into trouble at school, my mother-in-law exacerbated the situation by enabling her. Over time, my sister-in-law became more confrontational, harsh, and disrespectful. When she started college, she had a heated dispute with my mother-in-law and father-in-law. They were paying for her college tuition, but she was dissatisfied since they were also saving money for my husband's schooling, rather than giving it all to her as pocket money. At first, my father-in-law and mother-in-law refused to give my sister-in-law any more money but then my sister-in-law pointed out that my husband could just work his way through university as my father-in-law had done, especially since he was a guy. She said that she was far too fragile to perform such work alone. Following that, my husband's education fund began to diminish. He was not aware of this. All he knew was that there was money set aside for him. When it came time for admissions, he learned the truth when my sister-in-law encouraged him to just work his way through college. My husband chose to avoid contact with them. He began going no contact when he moved out at 19, but the decision had become permanent by the time he was 23. Hearing all of this made me realize how silly I was to invite my sister-in-law into our home. My husband also said that his mother had repeatedly contacted him over the years to ask for money, despite the fact that my sister-in-law appeared to be wealthy. Later, he discovered from a relative that my sister-in-law was doing drugs. While she did not appear to have a drug problem, that's when I realized what had happened with the lost keys. My spouse quickly instructed me to call a locksmith and have the locks changed as soon as possible. He was concerned about when or if my sister-in-law would try to enter our home. I immediately disabled my sister-in-law's contact information and social media sites, preventing her from contacting me. We had the locks replaced, and as I said in my previous report, I felt a lot better after that. As my job responsibilities changed, I had to return to the office to work on Wednesdays and Fridays. When I got home one Friday, I noticed that my spouse had already arrived. It turns out that our neighbor, a nice old lady, was outdoors in her garden when she observed a suspicious young woman attempting to enter our home. The woman's description was exactly like my sister-in-law. The neighbor phoned the cops and they apprehended her. My husband has decided not to prosecute charges, but he will apply for a restraining order to safeguard our safety. Looking back, I understand how naive I was in trusting others so easily. While my objective was to aid my husband, I now realize that my actions were presumptuous. If you care so much about your husband's well-being, why don't you tell him everything rather than keeping things from him? I'm sure it would upset him more to find that you were keeping things from him than to learn that you were talking to his sister. Update: after the unsettling events with my sister-in-law, things were tense, but in many ways they had also cleared up. The locks had been changed, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The safety of our home was now secure, but the emotional toll still lingered. It had been a strange few weeks, surreal, almost like a dream I couldn't quite wake up from. I was glad my husband had stepped in and taken charge of the situation. I'd always trusted him to protect me, and he had without question. But even though I felt safer now, there was a gnawing sense of guilt that hadn't quite left me. I had kept secrets from him. I'd believed I was acting out of love, but in hindsight, I now understood that my decisions had been far more misguided than I'd realized. We didn't discuss the situation again for a while, but the air in our home had shifted. My husband had made it clear that the whole thing had hurt him not necessarily because I was trying to help. He wanted to be there to make those decisions together, but I'd bypassed that and gone ahead with the conversations and even the contact with his sister, assuming that I could handle it. I didn't want to put pressure on him, but I should have trusted him enough to lean on him. Still, he hadn't reacted as angrily as I thought he would. In the end, I realized that he wasn't angry at me. He was disappointed in my actions. And that hurt more than anything. His disappointment was something I had never fully grasped until that moment, and it was a lesson I had learned the hard way. Things started to calm down after that, and life began to feel somewhat normal again. We resumed our daily routines, with me working from home and him heading off to his job. We were finally settling into married life in a way that felt right, even if it was filled with bumps along the way. But as time went on, something else happened, something I hadn't anticipated. My husband's silence about his family started to deepen again. It wasn't that he was closed off, it was more like a quiet sadness that seemed to hang in the air when we were alone. Every time we had a quiet moment together, I felt this unspoken sadness between us, as if his unresolved issues with his family were still weighing on him. I knew he missed the idea of family. He longed for closeness with people who were supposed to be there for him, who were supposed to love him unconditionally. But his experiences with them had shaped him into someone who preferred to keep his distance, someone who learned to survive without that support. I had tried to be understanding, tried to give him space, but the more time passed, the more I realized I couldn't avoid the topic forever. I had to find a way to help him heal, or at least to make him feel seen. It wasn't easy, especially since I had no idea where to start. I wasn't sure how to fix this when my own involvement had made everything so much more complicated. One evening, while we were cooking dinner together, my husband said something that surprised me. He told me that he was thinking about reaching out to his parents again. I froze, not knowing how to respond. This was something he'd never spoken about since we got married, something he had always been reluctant to even consider. But now, after everything that had happened with his sister, he was contemplating it. He seemed hesitant, unsure of how to even begin the conversation. I could feel the uncertainty in his voice, the weight of years of hurt that had yet to be addressed. I could tell that even though he wanted to mend things, he still had a deep fear of being let down again. His relationship with his family was fragile, more fragile than I could have understood without living through all of this. "I don't know if they'll listen," he said quietly, looking down at the chopping board in front of him. "But I feel like I need to try, at least for my own peace of mind." I felt a sudden surge of love for him. It was heartbreaking to think of how much he had endured, how much pain he had silently carried. I wanted to support him in this, but I also knew that his decision was something only he could make. The scars from the past were his to navigate, and I could only offer a hand to hold, a place to return to when things felt too much. I knew that no matter what, I would stand by him through whatever came next. In the days that followed we talked more openly about his family, and the tension between us seemed to ease. He spoke about his sister with a mixture of sadness and frustration, about how much she had changed over the years and how painful it had been to watch. I listened carefully, understanding now just how much his family's dysfunction had affected him. His parents, particularly his father, had always been a source of stress, manipulating and pressuring him, making him feel small and inadequate. His sister had followed in their footsteps, using charm as a mask for her selfishness. But despite all of that, I knew my husband had always longed for a connection, for a family that actually cared for him in the way he deserved. And now, as I listened to him, I realized that I had the chance to help him heal in ways I hadn't even considered. I didn't know how long it would take for him to reach out to them, or if he ever would. But I did know that no matter what, I would be there for him. This was his journey, and it was mine too, as his wife. We were building something together, a new kind of family, one that would give him the space to figure out how to reconcile his past while looking forward to the future. After all, we had come this far. We had fought to be together, we had built a home together, and now we would take this next step together, whatever it looked like. Whether or not we could fix his relationship with his family, we could at least continue to heal together side by side. As for my sister-in-law, I hadn't heard from her since the locksmith incident, and to be honest, I wasn't sure if I ever wanted to again. I couldn't deny that she had crossed a line with her behavior, and the way she had acted towards me and my home left me feeling deeply uncomfortable. The thought of her trying to break into our house, or worse, using our trust against us, had shaken me in ways I couldn't easily put aside. But now I knew I had to focus on what mattered: my marriage, my husband, and the life we were building together. Family, as complicated as it was, would always be a part of us, but we had our own story to write now. Final update. As the weeks turned into months, things between my husband and me began to feel more settled, though still marked by the subtle tension of unresolved family matters. It wasn't that everything had magically fixed itself, there was still that lingering sadness from his past, that hurt that he carried like an invisible weight, but we were learning to navigate it together. We had our good days, our challenging ones, but the most important thing was that we were doing it together. My husband had, after a lot of internal conflict, finally decided to reach out to his parents. The first attempt was brief, a simple, "Hey, it's been a while. I've been thinking about us, and I want to talk some time." It was nothing grand or full of emotion, but it was a start. When the call came through, I could tell that it had taken everything in him to make that first step. I'd been there beside him, waiting for him to tell me what had happened afterward. His voice was distant when he recounted the conversation, but I could hear the relief in it, the smallest spark of hope that perhaps, just maybe, they might be willing to rebuild the relationship. We knew the road would be long, but that was okay. What mattered was that he had opened that door just a crack. It was a beginning, and that was enough for now. As for his sister, I never heard from her again. She never reached out to apologize, never attempted to explain herself or offer any kind of reconciliation. And in a way, that final silence was a gift. It allowed me to move on, to stop worrying about what she might do next, or whether she would try to insert herself back into our lives in some chaotic, hurtful way. The incident with the locks, while unsettling, had made it clear that she was no longer someone I could trust or even want in my life. And in time I accepted that it was okay to let go of the expectation that family should always be there to support you. As the months went by, I focused more on what I had built with my husband, what we had built together. We strengthened our bond, communicated more openly, and learned to make space for each other's vulnerabilities. There were still times when the weight of the past pressed down on us, but we learned to carry it, sharing the burden. The feeling of safety and trust that we were cultivating together was enough to get us through even the toughest moments. One afternoon, as we sat together on the couch, sharing a quiet moment, my husband turned to me and smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Thank you," he said softly, almost as if it was the first time he truly said those words with all his heart. "For being here, for understanding, for not giving up on me. I know I haven't been easy." I smiled back, squeezing his hand. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together. I love you." And in that moment, all the hurt, the uncertainty, the lingering family drama faded away. We were moving forward, not because everything was perfect, but because we had each other, and that was enough. His parents called again a few weeks later, and while the conversation was tentative, it was a positive step. They had questions about what had transpired, but my husband answered them in his own time, choosing honesty over fear, allowing himself to finally express the pain he'd held onto for so long. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was real. There was no magical fix, no perfect resolution, but there was an understanding that things could improve if they both worked for it. Ultimately, things didn't unfold in the dramatic, life-changing way I had imagined when we first faced the chaos of his sister's actions. But there was peace, a quiet peace that came from healing, from learning to forgive, and from acknowledging that we were capable of moving forward together. In the end, the most important lesson I learned through all of this was the power of choices, the choices we make to protect ourselves, to love and support one another, and to set boundaries that allow us to build healthier relationships, both within family and outside of it. As time passed, the house felt like a home again. We filled it with memories of laughter, shared dreams, and moments of deep. My husband had reconciled with his parents in his own way, and though it wasn't perfect, it was progress. His sister had faded from our lives, and with her absence came the clarity that we had made the right decision by removing her influence. We didn't need anyone else's approval or validation. We had each other, and that was everything. Our future, once clouded by uncertainty and past hurts, now felt bright and full of possibility. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but we were strong enough to face whatever came our way, together. And with that our story, with all its challenges and triumphs, came to a peaceful close. The weight of the past had been lifted, replaced with a quiet, unspoken understanding that no matter what the future held, we had each other, and that was all we would ever need.